Give her a hug. I'm so grateful to be here, especially at the launch of something that's really, really meaningful. And I love how you're shining a light on kindness, because I've been researching this subject for years. And I thought I'd start actually with a question that kind of frames what I'm going to talk about. If I was to ask you, what is the opposite of stress? What would you say? Anyone? Relaxation. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. And I believed that for years. And it turns out that relaxation is the absence of stress. And I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. It's the absence of stress. And it turns out the absence and the opposite are two different things. It turns out, amazingly, right, the opposite of stress is kindness. And I know that sounds a bit odd, because stress is a state, it's a feeling, isn't it? And kindness is something that you do, or even something that you say. So let me reword it. The opposite of an experience of stress and what that feels like is an experience of kindness, and what an experience of kindness feels like. And if you look inside the brain, the body, everything that happens when you feel stressed, then you'll find that when you be kind, it does exactly the opposite things. There's a scientific study done by psychologists a couple of years ago. They sent a bunch of people a text message at 9:30 every night. And they asked them for two numbers. And this ran on for 3 weeks. So every night at 9:30 for 3 weeks, they asked them to give a report of two numbers. The first number was, how many stressful things did you encounter today? How many times did you feel you got stressed today? And the second number was, on a scale 0 to 10, roughly, or more, depending what kind of person you are, how many kind things did you do? You know, in other words, things that you said, compliments you paid, you know, ways that you helped people. So the two numbers, one was a stress score, one was a kindness score. And they crunched all the numbers after 3 weeks, and amazingly what they found, on the days when the kindness number score was high, i.e. there was a lot of kindness, the stress number score was really low. And on days when the stress number score was high, the kindness number score was low. And they actually drew a picture of a seesaw, because that's what happened. Whenever kindness increased, stress went down in exactly the opposite direction. And it turns out, as I said, kindness is literally the opposite of stress. And it's not just that it feels like that. It's a physical effect in the brain. You know when you feel stressed, and it feels like really annoying, it's really hard sometimes. And that's why what happens is there a part in the brain, deep into the brain, called the stress region, and it actually dials up. It's like you turn the volume up and it's too loud kind of thing on a radio, or you turn a dimmer switch and the light's too bright. So there's this stress region of the brain, and when you feel stressed about something, it dials up, and that's why sometimes when you're feeling stressed, it's difficult to just think positive, isn't it? You know, because it's a physical effect. Unless you're well trained at managing your state, it's quite difficult to just think positive, because it's a physical event. And sometimes if someone says, when you're feeling stressed, just think positive, you want to punch them, Obviously kindly, of course. Just like a wee touch. But it's because it's a physical effect. But this is the magic. When you have an experience of kindness, and when I say an experience of kindness, that could be when you've been kind, you've helped someone, when you've said something kind. It could even be when you've been on the other end of it and you've received some kindness, or even when you've just heard about it because someone's told you a story about something that's recently happened that had kindness in it. Or you've watched, like I watched a dog rescue video this morning on YouTube, and I had an experience of kindness. I watched someone being kind to rescue this dog, and it just really moved me. So whether you're the giver, the receiver, or even the witness to it, it targets exactly the same brain region. It's a physical effect, and it dials it down in exactly the opposite direction. So stress dials this region up, it turns the volume up, and kindness literally, physically dials it down in exactly the opposite direction. And it gets better, because kindness also dials up the activity of a wee part of the brain. And the point I'm making here, kindness isn't just something you do or something you say. It has a physical effect in your brain. And what it does at the front of the brain is it dials up the intensity of the wee region at the front, just to the left, that plays a key role. If you look at brain scans, it plays a key role in happiness and a key role in joy and the experience of positive moods and positive emotions. And when you do something kind, or even witness it or receive it, that part there dials up in intensity. And if you keep doing it regularly, then it actually trains this part of the brain like a muscle. You know, if you go to the gym And let's say you do reps at the gym, maybe you're doing squats or something for 2 or 3 weeks. And you'll notice that 3 things happen to your muscle when you start working out. It gets firmer, larger, and more powerful. And everything you use that muscle for becomes easier. So I was trying to lift something heavy before I went to the gym, and it's quite heavy. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of working out, because the muscle is more powerful, it's firmer, larger, more powerful, lifting the thing is actually quite easy because the muscle's stronger. So if you work out a region of the brain, in other words, if you make kindness a habit in terms of how you treat people, not just how you treat people, but in terms of how you think about people, how you communicate with people, you make it a habit, that part of the brain gets a workout frequently. And if you look at brain scans, it actually changes the physical structure of the brain. That's the key. It's a physical change in the structure of the brain, like a muscle is actually physically changing. And what that means is happiness and positive mood become more accessible to you. Doesn't mean if you be kind, you'll always be happy, because we know that one of life's specialties is curveballs. So it's not always easy amid the stresses and strains of life. But if that part of the brain is more powerful, it does mean that it's more accessible to you. It's slightly easier against the backdrop of life as it happens. But it gets better, because it turns out that the effects of kindness don't just hang around in the brain. One of my favourite pieces of research came out a couple of years ago when scientists recruited a couple of 100 people who had been clinically diagnosed with hypertension, so high blood pressure. And they randomised them into 2 different groups. And they gave all of them a sum of money at the beginning of each week for 3 weeks. And they said to one group, they said, take this money and do something kind with it. Help someone. So one group of them, so about 100 people, were asked to take the money they got every week and use it kindly, help someone with that money. The other half were told, take that money away, treat yourself, enjoy yourself, do whatever you like, but just spend it on yourself. At the end of 3 weeks, those who'd spent the money on other people, used it in kindness, had significantly lower blood pressure. Systolic and diastolic, that's the big number and the small number, both systolic and diastolic, significantly lower blood pressure than those who'd spent the money on themselves. And amazingly, the magnitude of the drop was comparable with antihypertensive medication and exercise. I find that particularly interesting because I used to work in cardiovascular medicine. So after my PhD, I worked for a big pharmaceutical company, and I used to literally build heart drugs, literally like Lego. It's called organic chemistry. It's like Lego, but instead of using plastic blocks, we use atoms as blocks, but the idea is the same. Instead of building cars and buildings out of plastic blocks, we build medicines out of atomic blocks, but the concept is like Lego. And so I worked in cardiovascular medicine and cancer. So when I came across that kind of research, that helping other people actually lowers your blood pressure, that just blew me away. So I had to start researching it, and it turns out it's not just because it sort of feels nice. There is a physical effect on your arteries when you help someone. Remember, I said kindness is the opposite of stress, right? So, most of us have heard of the word stress hormones. Most of us have heard of adrenaline, cortisol, right? So these are called stress hormones. In other words, they're produced when you feel stressed, right? When you have an experience of stress. Now, if kindness is the opposite of stress, stress hormones are just the stuff that gets made in the body when you feel stressed. So when you be kind, there's also stuff that gets made in the body when you're being kind. I like to call them kindness hormones, just to draw the parallel, because it's just, these hormones are just stuff that gets made inside the body when you feel stressed or when you be kind. So if one's stress hormones, I call the other ones kindness hormones. But amazingly, what they do is they park on the lining of your arteries. They literally park on the lining of your blood vessels. I say park, you know, big car parks and the motorway services, and you've got different shapes and sizes of parking bays that are receptive to vehicles of different shapes and sizes. You've got really big ones for the buses and caravans, and medium-sized ones for SUVs, normal-sized ones for cars, and even wee dinky ones for motorcycles. So you've got different shapes and sizes of parking bays. On your lining of your arteries, your veins and all that, you've got also parking bays of different shapes and sizes. Scientists don't call them parking bays. We like to sound really clever. They're called receptors, right? And we also have vehicles that float around, but they're not. Scientists don't call them vehicles either. Again, we like to sound really clever, so they're called hormones. So if ever you hear the term hormone and receptor, that's just the same as a vehicle and a parking bay. So when you be kind, you have any experience of kindness, your brain squirts out and your heart physically squirts out these kindness hormones. They park on the lining of your blood vessels, literally park, right? And then the magic happens. The blood vessels like that, right? And there's a tension in the wall all the time, and that's adjusted all the time by your brain, depending on what's happening in your life. And what happens when these kindness hormones park is it causes a release in the tension in the artery wall, and it goes like that. It releases, it softens, it literally softens, and it goes, and it expands. Probably makes that sound if you were listening close enough. But actually expands. And it means that your heart doesn't, because it's wider now, your blood vessel's wider, your heart doesn't have to push with the same power to get the blood through. So what it does is your heart eases off some of its pressure because it doesn't have to push as hard. What you and I get out of that is a reduction in blood pressure. So kindness is actually, in science, it's called cardioprotective. And that means that it protects your cardiovascular system. Kindness is actually cardioprotective. And it's not just, again, that it feels nice. It's a physical effect. Being kind is actually a physical effect on the lining of your arteries. Isn't that absolutely astonishing? It actually explains my favourite statistic. Right? I love animals. We've got a wee dog at the moment, but we lost a dog a few years ago. He was only 2 years old. Oscar, he was a golden Labrador, and he had bone cancer, just 2-year-old. And we did everything you could imagine to save his life. So you'll understand why this is my favourite statistic, right? Get this. The chances of a second heart attack, like someone who's had a heart attack, right? The chances of another one within 1 year, if you have a dog, 400% less, right? It is 400% less. Now, you'd be forgiven for assuming that that's due to the exercise you get from taking the dog for a walk, but that, of course, that plays a role, but not as much of a role as you think. Because front page in one of the biggest scientific journals in the world a couple of years ago, photograph of a dog, yellow Labrador, incidentally, and they'd watched dog owners interacting kindly, affectionately, lovingly and warmly with their dogs for half an hour. And amazingly, levels of kindness hormones rocketed up at the rate of 10% per minute. Not 10% in total, 10% per minute. When I worked in cardiovascular medicine, if someone had said to me, if you interact kindly, affectionately, compassionately with a dog or a cat even, but it works the same with cats, or rabbits, horses, the same, exactly the same, you'll get a 10% hit of a cardio-protective hormone. I'd have taken that as a win. I'd be telling people I'd be getting a dog or a cat. But it wasn't 10% in total. It was 10% per minute. There was more than 300% increase in kindness hormone levels. So one of the reasons why it's so cardioprotective is because it's a physical effect in your arteries. But it gets even better. A groundbreaking piece of research got published quite recently. Scientists asked a group of people, like a good couple of 179 people, 182, sorry, and they asked half of them. They said, do 3 acts of kindness for someone, for people, right? Do 3 kind things for people per week for the next 4 weeks. So in other words, just 12 acts of kindness, but do 3 a week for 4 weeks. To the other group, they said, do 12 acts of kindness over the 4 weeks, again, for yourself. So 3 kind things for yourself per week for 4 weeks. And then they compared them with a group that's called a wait list who didn't do anything. It's for comparison. Incredibly, they took blood samples at the beginning and blood samples at the end. And unbelievably, what they found is those who were being kind to other people, the kindness had actually impacted their DNA. It impacted the genetic activity of circulating immune cells, white blood cells. It's the stuff that gets counted if you go to the hospital and you get your blood taken. They measure your immune response. It's called the white blood cells. And amazingly, they looked inside the white blood cells, and it had impacted kindness to other people, had impacted the activity of the DNA. In a way, the result was it reduced inflammation in your blood, brain, and body. Amazingly. And bolstered natural antiviral activity. It's almost like nature. I call this nature's reward. It's like nature is saying to us, you're supposed to be kind. We're supposed to help each other. That's our nature. In fact, we have genes that are related to our capacity for kindness, and they are the oldest in the human genome, or one of the oldest, like 100 million years old. And what that means is they're crucial for the survival and thriving of the human species. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't be here, right? So it's absolutely necessary. So I think of it as nature's reward. Nature's saying, you're supposed to be kind. We're supposed to help each other. And not just the big ways, but the small, everyday, meaningful ways. And nature's saying, so here's a wee squirt of happy hormones to make you feel good. And here's a wee massage to your heart and your immune system for your trouble. And it gets actually better, because kindness even impacts the rate of biological aging. Scientists got people to, this sounds a bit woo-woo, right? They actually got people to think kind thoughts about people, right? For 20 minutes a day for a couple of months. And they were compared to people just meditating, right? Just to make a comparison. And it turned out that when they measured you can measure the rate of aging using very sophisticated equipment where you look at the behaviour of inside your cells of your DNA. And what they found was a dramatic slowing of the rate of aging inside our cells right down at the DNA level. And the question is, how do we be kind? Sometimes when I give talks about this, we assume that when we're thinking, how do you be kind? We're assuming that it's the grand gestures we need to make. But it's actually not. It's the little shows of support. It's the words of encouragement. It's the way you just help someone in a small way. I saw my mum the other day and she made me a sandwich. Mum doesn't think of that as kindness, but it is kindness. The small things, the encouragement, the support, the checking in on someone. All these things, these are the things that impact your DNA. These are the things that impact your heart and your brain. Not the grand gestures, yes, do them if you can, but it's the little things we do more often. And it's also in our attitudes. You've probably heard this one a million times, because I've heard it so many times. I've written about it as well, that be kind because you never know what someone's dealing with behind closed doors. I've written that before, but I really understood it properly a couple of years ago. I lost my dad a couple of years ago. He was only 78 and he had a brain tumour. My dad was the healthiest person, walked 40 miles a week, totally random thing to land in our family. And I used to take my dad for his radiotherapy treatments. My mum and dad, well, my mum still lives in Banknock, a wee village past Bonnybridge, Denny out that way. And I used to drive, from where I live in Dunblane, I used to drive to there, pick them up, and then drive through to the Western in Edinburgh 3 times a week for a month as my dad went through his radiotherapy. And it was really important to my dad that we were there early, like 40 minutes early, just the way the tumour affected me. Needed to be super early. And I made sure I was all like an hour early. I just sat and had a cup of tea in the house before we went. But one morning, I was running late. Things happen, you get stuck on a call and stuff happens, and I was really disappointed in myself, and I'm hammering along the motorway to try to make up as much time as I could, heading over to Banknock to pick up my mum and my dad, and my mind is in turmoil, because I'm thinking, not only am I worrying about the prognosis and the inevitable, you're always hoping, but the inevitable prognosis and outcome, and then I'm also feeling so annoyed and angry at myself for being late and what that's going to do, how that'll make my dad feel. And I wasn't paying attention as I pulled off the road motorway onto a mini roundabout. And there was another car also on the mini roundabout. I didn't see it because I wasn't paying attention, because it was totally in my head. And luckily, we hit the brakes at the right time. Both of us screeched to a halt, and we missed each other by a centimetre, right? Now, had we had an accident, it would have been 100% my fault. Absolutely. Luckily, we didn't. But in that moment, you know what I expected? What you see most of the time on the roads, what I expected was a loud horn. And people do, they hold the horn an extra couple of seconds just so that you fully understand how bad a person you are for having almost caused that accident that time. And I was waiting on that, didn't happen. What I also expected was a mouthful of expletives and possibly even an obscene finger gesture or two. But what actually happened, it's if the guy, it was a man, and he must have really sensed something, because he looked at me and he said, "It's okay." And it was like a whisper, "It's okay, on you go, on you go." And it was like, I couldn't process. I drove around the roundabout and I burst into tears. I had to pull over side of the road. And it was just, the experience of kindness was the opposite of what I expected in that moment. And it just released something, and the tears came out, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about everything that's happening and stuff like that. But it was just some kind of release. And I don't think, if he'd have swore at me or peeped the horn for that extra few seconds, I don't think I could have coped that day. Because despite the front I put to the world, I was doing these talks around the country. And I'm making videos for social media, and I'm doing all my normal job. And despite the front I put to the world, I was really, really fragile on the inside. because nobody knew. My dad was a private man. Nobody knew what the family was going through, so I kept it private as well. So no one knew what we were going through. And so that's the day when I absolutely understood the meaning of those words, be kind, because you never know what someone's dealing with behind closed doors. And I've held that dearly ever since. And I thought just before I kind of finish, I'll share with you one of my favourite aspects of kindness. And it's the fact that kindness is contagious. Remember during COVID, remember the R numbers that we were all talking about? Right? An R number is the reproducibility rate. In science, it means if something's greater than 1, it reproduces, it's contagious. If it's less than 1, it kind of begins to disappear away. Kindness has an R number. And it's one of the highest R numbers that I've ever come across in science. Second only, as far as I've found, second only to chickenpox. Right? It's one of the highest R numbers I've ever came across. And it's between 3 and 5. Right? And that's highly contagious. But amazingly, research at Harvard University in America found that kindness actually, at that R number, has a ripple effect to what's called 3 degrees of separation. So let me explain what that means. Suppose you do something kind for someone today. Even say something. It might be a compliment you pay, a genuine compliment, right? But suppose you do something kind today. And again, not the grand gesture. I'm talking about the little shows of support, the checking in, the encouragement, the validating people, letting people feel seen and heard, whatever it is you do, tiny, the little things that you do. And then what happens is you get on with the rest of your day, not giving it another thought because you're a kind person. It's just what you do. What you don't see is what happens next. If you happen to follow that person around for the rest of the day, not that you would do that, but if you did, then what you would see is that person, because of how you made them feel, you gave them an experience of kindness, what you would see is that person will probably be kind or a little bit kinder to 5 people over the course of the next 24 hours for no reason other than because of how you made them feel. Those 5 people, that is the R number of kindness. But those 5 people are defined in science as being at 1 degree of separation from you. If you happen to have a wee drone, not that you would do that, but if you did and you tracked the behaviour of those 5 people, what you would find is over the course of the next 24 hours, because of how they feel, they will also be kind or kinder to 5 people. And what you'll get is 25 people now having an experience of kindness that you're not aware of because you've done the first thing and then got on with the rest of your day. Now there's 25 people at 2 degrees of separation from you having an experience of kindness, receiving some form of kindness. But kindness goes to 3. If you had a wee swarm of drones, again, not that you would do that, but if you did, and you tracked the behaviour of these 25 people, then what you would find roughly, it's not an exact science at this point, but roughly speaking, over the course of the next 24 hours, for no reason other than because of how you made them feel, those 25 people will be kind or kinder to 5 people. And what you now have at the concluding point of the ripple effect of kindness is 125 people receiving some form of kindness. It's like if you drop a pebble in a pond, casually, you're on the way to work and you just walk past and you casually flick a pebble, it lands in the pond, you get in your car or in the train, you do your thing. What you don't see, if you happen to come back and look, is the pebble goes plop and then it goes, and it creates a wee wave. And at the other side of the pond, the wave goes out. The other side of the pond, there's a wee lily pad going like that. And there's a wee bee on the lily pad, being kind. And it's just going like that. And it's got no idea why it's doing that. But it's doing that because of the wave. But what set the wave in motion was the pebble dropped in a pond. But the pebble's a metaphor for an act of kindness that you drop in somebody's day. And it's not water that's lifting, it's not lily pads that are lifting, it's the quality of people's days, it's smiles on people's faces that are lifting for no reason other than that one little thing that you did that you didn't even realise you did because you're just being your normal, absolute self. And I just wanted to finish with that because I think there's many days where we forget to realise how much of an impact we have in other people's lives and how much of an impact you can make from the tiny little things that you say and the tiny little things that you do that you don't even register in you as an act of kindness. But all of them have this ripple effect, and most of the time they go out to 3 degrees of separation, sometimes impacting much more than 125, sometimes a wee bit less. It's a ballpark average, but the point is everything, the little things that you do matter far more than you realise. So if you ever have those days where you're feeling small, or ever have those days where you feel that you've lost a wee bit of meaning or you just don't feel particularly great, just take note of the fact that All the little things that you do are literally, this is how we change the world. One little act of kindness at a time. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here today, because I think what you're doing here is absolutely magical. So thanks very much. And I hope that was useful.